Okay, I think it's on.
Welcome to chat. Okay. Are we ready?
Yes.
All right. Welcome to Chat, Communications, Happenings, and Trends. So today we're going to discuss a hit piece that came out a couple of days ago on the organization group Our Revolution that has been associated with Bernie Sanders. And so I think this was kind of not only a hit piece against Bernie Sanders, but also against grassroots organizations as a whole. And specifically, we're going to get into kind of a little bit of the nitty-gritty of this piece and also kind of how we view it as a hit piece, and maybe even go into how to identify hit pieces. And so first off, the author, which is Edward Isaac Dover, he has come out with subsequent articles or hit pieces as well. And they're all kind of centered around this and, you know, quinky dink, I think not. So first off, when you get into it, you're looking at basically them mentioning already the email list that Bernie Sanders has. And so this is kind of a little problem that I have with this type of messaging on the Democratic side, is that they want the email list, they want the support of Bernie Sanders and the grassroots organizations that back him, while simultaneously arguing that Bernie Sanders is not a Democrat. So that makes no sense whatsoever. But you can kind of see the little problem that this author has with Bernie Sanders immediately, because he has refused to provide that email content to the Democratic Party and to additional candidates supported by the Democrats. So that's kind of like just right out the gate, just literally the second paragraph available here.
Well, I just want to add in one thing. I mean, even just the title, I mean, Bernie's not involved in our revolution anymore. And they're saying that Bernie Sanders, the army is in disarray. Like they're making it about him, where it's about our revolution. So,
yeah, I was going to get there too. Again, it does say Bernie Sanders, just as Janet said, that Bernie Sanders' army is in disarray, but Bernie Sanders actually, is not associated with the group. He does not communicate with them. He may endorse subsequent candidates that they have endorsed, but as far as like messaging or anything like that, that is completely separate from him. And so that's something to keep in mind too. So they want his email list from Our Revolution that they're saying that has access to it. I don't know if they have access to it or not, to be perfectly honest. And in the second, I guess, kind of within the same I guess like 3 pages in, you kind of get this sense that what the issue is here, and why they did this hit piece, even because they specifically note perception. It's about perception. And in the piece they say, from a quote, perception it has an impact on his support going into 2020. And by him, they mean Bernie Sanders. He needs enthusiasm. Well, what is a good way to manipulate the perception of this group and also Bernie Sanders is to paint it in a very poor light. And so you kind of get a sense where they're going with this and why they've actually written this piece. Now, there are some legitimate complaints here, and we can kind of get into that. If we go to another part, it mentions, and Janet, you can kind of jump in at any time because I'm kind of just going through the points that I noticed are particularly problematic, is that they had a problem with Our Revolution basically not supporting centrist candidates when the candidates that they supported had lost to these centrists. And of course, money in politics is a big deal, and it's possible that the centrists won because they were able to basically get their message out to the public better because they had more finances and more money available to them. Basically, they said that Our Revolution can not only not boast any victories, which isn't true, and we'll get to that because I have 3 pages worth of people just in 2018 that Our Revolution has endorsed that won. But also they failed to subsequently endorse these candidates like Doug Jones. Why would they endorse Doug Jones? He doesn't represent what these grassroots organizations like Our Revolution does. He doesn't want money out of politics. Our Revolution does. They're on a completely different spectrum. You know, Our Revolution's here, Doug Jones, I would argue, is a Republican. So why would they endorse a Republican candidate that doesn't want to do anything about money in politics, that just basically allowed to have banks and loan people that give loans basically discriminate against people based off of race? Why in the world would Our Revolution do that? And if they did, what would be the response from this author? You think that they would be like, see, Our Revolution endorsed Doug Jones. You can't win. And that's the problem here, is that you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And it's crazy. So that's a problem. And I think you wanted to mention how the messaging here, there's this particular quote by Lucy Flores, and what she says is in quotes, and they're asking her a question, or she's kind of asking a question, like, do you want to focus on running the organization and making sure it is transparent, building it up outside of the quotations, or on raising her profile? And by her, she meant, or they're meaning Nina Turner, back in quotations, you do have to make that decision, end quote. So who inserted the or on raising her profile bit? That's not a direct quote from Lucy here. It's not. It was outside of the quotation. So who did that? Was it an implied thing that the author inserted in because that was what she was implying? Or did the author insert it just to insert it, to intend that that's what she was implying? So this was a total hit piece, and it's really disgusting how this played out. And I know, Janet, you really did a thorough inspection of this, but I did want to make note of all the people that have been endorsed by Our Revolution that have won in their districts. Some notable names like Stacey Abrams in Georgia, governor. So right now, she is basically the primary. She's going to run for the main gubernatorial race. She won the primary, and she's going to be running against a Republican in Georgia. And right now, I see all these Democrats going, yay, Stacey Abrams won in Georgia. Look at the good job we did. Look at how fantastic. You know what? Who endorsed her and who didn't? Let's see. Did the Democratic Party support this candidate? Nope. Who did? Our Revolution and various other grassroots organizations supported this candidate and helped fund her and things like that in the race. So that's a notable one, if I do say so myself. There's one in Georgia, Lisa King won for U.S. House of Representatives, her primary race. She won in that. And these are all kind of primary races because we're not quite there yet. Pennsylvania, state representative again, Sarah, I can't pronounce her last name. There's an U.S. representative. I don't have the area, but it's, Illinois. State representative in Illinois, Chuy Garcia won his primary. So you see that there are a decent amount. There's a state senate in Oregon. Charles Gallia for state senate won the primary race in a couple of weeks ago. I mean, there's just a plethora of different candidates that have been endorsed by Our Revolution. So what they did was lie straight to your face, but it was a half lie, if that makes any sense, because they're going to argue, well, they haven't won their main races yet, right? They've just won their primaries. So does that count? I would argue that it still counts, right? It would. I mean, we haven't had anybody, it's been mostly primary races at this point.
Yeah.
We're still waiting for 2018 to have their elections in November.
So you had even Tom Perez boosting, look at all the Dems that won when they were primaries. So yeah, I would call them wins because hell, if he's going to call a Dem primary win a Dem against a Dem, then yeah, we get those wins.
Absolutely. So yeah, that's another thing. Why do they get to have those wins, but Our Revolution doesn't? It's not considered wins when they do it, but it's considered wins when the Democratic Party does it? That makes no fucking sense, dude. So kind of stop talking out of your ass. That's really what's going on, right? They're saying one thing and doing another, and then being super hypocritical about it. And what it really comes down to is, one, they want to break down these grassroots organizations, and they're starting with probably what they see as the biggest threat. Nina Turner to them is a threat. And there are some legitimate criticisms that one can make about our revolution. I don't like how non-transparent some of these processes are, but simultaneously, every organization has done this. Like, how do you go about selecting what candidates you're going to endorse? Like, who makes these decisions, and who kind of gets floated to, who floats to the top? Well, I've asked the same thing about Justice Democrats. Like, what is your process of selecting a candidate? They don't release that information. I've asked the same thing about the Democrats. What is your process in selecting candidates? They don't release that information. In fact, they go ahead and endorse and select their candidate, but they basically argue neutrality. So it's just a total line and bullshit.
On the Cuomo, I don't know why I was saying Cuomo, but on the Cuomo one, Nomiki Konst actually came out with, she found from Our Revolution, she got the copies of the letter they sent him and what they wanted him to do, and he never answered them. So is it a lie in the article when they said that they never reached out to him? Or, I mean, were they just making that assumption? Or I don't know. Like, did someone from Cuomo's office just say that? Or is the author once again making an assumption?
Well, here's the thing about that. Yes, I'm going to just say right now it's a bold-faced lie. That's because if the author doesn't know, don't make the assumption. Otherwise, you are putting yourself in a position to be inaccurate and to have lied about something, right? You need to reach out to whatever office and ask them, did Our Revolution reach out to you to see if they could endorse you as a candidate? And if the office says no, then you'll go with that. But, don't make the assumption. And in both ways, it's a lie, right? It's either the office lied, and so the reporter reported what the office had said, or the author lied. So either way, it's a lie. So yeah, it's a lie. Yeah. And it's a lie to basically say that they can't boast any type of major victories, because I think winning a primary race against a centrist, against what the Democratic machine has put up, is a huge victory. You have all the odds against you. Yeah, maybe you don't have the damn email list, but you have all the money, which does matter in a lot of these races. Money matters right now because that's how our political system is run. Well, and so they're doing it with very little funds.
And especially since these they're new. I mean, they're 2 years old. You know what I mean? And so they're picking the candidates now, and they're all progressive. And this whole movement is really only like a lot of people didn't really get into doing a lot of politics until 2015, until Bernie came around. So they're doing excellent. If you look at the numbers, I mean, they did, I think it's at 46.2% of their candidates have won their whatever elections they were in so far. So, Amanda, are you on mute?
Yeah, I was on mute. And I was like, I'm sitting here laughing at Peter Douche's comments. I don't know if you've seen them. Half truths, half lies are also half truths.
Who invited you anyways?
With that, honestly, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that statement whatsoever. Can I call it maybe a white lie then? What do we call those type of lies where they're kind of lying but kind of like inserting some truth? Yeah, half lies are also half truth. But I think like they were either all or none. Right?
They were just
you want to be accurate as much as possible.
Okay. They were taking a plate of spaghetti, they were throwing it against the wall and seeing what stuck. And yeah, did they get something to stick? Yeah. I mean, Figaro, but a lot of us knew about her prior to. It was just the fact that we didn't know she was connected, but she also hadn't been working there. They say 2 weeks ago, he says in the article that the board meeting met. Well, for those 2 weeks, she wasn't working there. He was still insinuating that she was still working there. And he had to know. If he knew that the board, they met, he had to have known that she had been gone for 2 weeks out of the job. And he didn't mention that in the article.
Well, he has subsequently had new articles come out basically saying like, hey, this person no longer is associated or works with the organization. But again, the time frame's a bit iffy. I didn't read those as thoroughly as I did read this one. So that's kind of maybe a legitimate complaint is that particular individual, right? Like, what experience did they have to be, I guess, promoted for that or try to advocated for that position in the first place? It does seem a little bit nepotistic, and that's just from my perspective. I said that that's problematic.
But there was probably nepotism there, but there was also he said that she had no experience. She's had experience in organizing. I've had activists actually in private DMs say, I worked with her. She organized, this and that.
Right. But that's not the experience that he noted. He was basically asking, like, what experience does she have in trying to get people elected, not in activism. And that's the difference here, is that this is more of an activism grassroots organization. It's not primarily to be basically a new party, right? Yeah. It's not trying to replace the Democrats as a party, but it is trying to promote candidates that they feel are worthy of this type of promotions, that aren't as corrupt, or aren't corrupt, hopefully, not even as corrupt. And so that is a distinction between what these grassroots organizations are doing versus what the Democrat as a party have. It's stupid to assume that they should be even on the same playing field.
Someone's saying the public is calling for Walter. Are you talking about Walter, my cat? He's not around. I think you gotta stop. Oh, you mute me because then I go crazy. Okay. Unmute and talk. I have nothing more to say.
All right. So, I mean, we've got about 10 more minutes left that we're going to be on this feed. And so let's see if there's anything, if you guys want to respond in the conversations and kind of about this subject, we'll read some of your comments and address them. Of course, I'll take a moment to read.
I know.
Right. So Celeste Home makes a good point. She said, but that's just the problem. The corporatist Dems do not want grassroots activists in the party. And I think you hit the nail on the head right there. I think you're absolutely right, which is why they come out with these hit pieces against organizations that are trying to basically do grassroots movements. Because these grassroots movements, what are they? They're a threat to the establishment. They're going to threaten the scheme that they've built for themselves. They're threatening the idea of money in politics, and at least saying, you know what, I don't want to be corrupt like this. Money in politics is too corrupting, is a corrupting influence, while the Democratic Party are saying, no, it's really not. It's a good thing. We don't really just listen to our donors. You know what? If we lived in a democracy, we would have universal health care, because over 60% of the American people want universal healthcare, a single payer or Medicare for all system. And again, if we lived in a democracy, we would have that by now. If we lived in a democracy, we would also have reasonable gun laws, universal background checks, for instance, that would go across state lines. Universal background checks at gun shows, because right now they don't exist. The background checks don't exist at gun shows, depending on what state you live in. So it's very easy to get a firearm that way. But again, 80% of the population want something along those lines regarding universal background checks. And obviously that includes NRA members. It's a very high percentage of the population. If we lived in a democracy, we'd have that right now. So then we have to ask, What the hell? We obviously don't live in a democracy. These corporations have corrupted our politicians to the extent that they no longer respond to the people. If people are getting arrested outside of state senators' offices or state representatives' offices, that is not a democracy.
Another thing I wanted to mention was this piece was pretty much timed out with Hillary giving her, her, why can't I think of the word? Backing
endorsement.
Cuomo. Yeah, endorsement. Backing Cuomo. I mean, there's the rumors out there that it was definitely kind of a Cuomo piece that he wanted. So I was trying to look into it, and I'm just going to tell you guys this. So I was trying to see, okay, is there a connection between Duvere and Cuomo? And the one I could come up with is Maggie Haberman. I mean, she was on CNN with Cuomo only weeks ago, the end of April, and she writes a lot of, when she was at Politico, she wrote a lot of pieces with Duvere. So
she does in New York Times now, right?
Yes. Yeah. But she did a lot of pieces, and she wrote a few pieces. Two of those pieces were on Cuomo back 2011, 2012, around then. So it's not like there's not a connection there. So it's not far-fetched to say that this piece had everything to do with our revolution endorsing Cynthia Nixon.
So Peter Douche wrote into the chat, Dems are the less evil crime family. Fact. Yeah. I mean, did they give us an option? Right? It's always select the lesser of two evils. I'm going to shove it down your throat. And we demand from you the vote. You don't get to decide. You don't get to make these decisions because we've decided it for you. There was this thing that I keep shoving out on Twitter to everybody. I think I've been obsessed with this all day, was the graphs that the New York Times had about a study that they did to basically see where everybody's political beliefs were. If they identified with centrist, far left, far right, and basically where they stood on authoritarianism and free and fair elections. Well, centrists were less likely to want free and fair elections. No surprise there. What kind of surprised me was their authoritarian levels. They were more authoritarian, at least in the United States, than the far fucking right. Which, I mean, I know that I've met some Clinton supporters that are just like, you should bow your head to this queen. It's your fault she lost. Wait, I thought I lived in a democracy. Don't I get to decide? We shouldn't have third parties because it ruins the whole thing. That's a democracy, man. You're supposed to be able to vote for whomever you please. If you want to do a write-in candidate, if you want to vote for D's nuts because he was on the ballot in one of the states, right? At least in a primary, D's nuts was. Then you can vote for D's nuts. Because we live in a fucking democracy, or at least we're supposed to. But the centrists, no, they don't want that. They want you to vote for the candidate that they chose for you. And then be like, oh, I live in a democracy. Bullshit. Anyways, moving on to another comment.
I had a question. Bluebell 51 wrote that they were taking over the poor people's party, the march, the protests going on right now. Is that did you mean the Dems are doing that? That's what I was trying to figure out. I haven't really. I'm bad. I should have been paying more attention to it the last couple of weeks, and I haven't. You can go and do another one, Amanda. You're a mute.
So somebody writes in. I don't know if you're kidding. This isn't a democracy. This is a republic. Okay, so technically, it's supposed to be a representative democracy, right? So full democracies are a bit different from representative democracies. representative democracies rely on like electoral college systems, basically. If a full democracy were in place, we would vote on every initiative, right?
Yeah.
We wouldn't send people to Congress for us to vote on our behalf. And what we do, we send people to represent us. But instead, they represent corporations. So it's technically supposed to be a representative democracy. Now, I would argue that it's either bridging courtocracy at this point, or even oligarchy, or the infusion of the two, which oligarchy can represent a corporatocracy as well, which that means basically that you have a handful of people basically running everything. So you've got a handful of rich people that basically get to dictate how policies and politics runs in the United States. And there's a lot of evidence that does actually support this. There was a study, I think by, was it Harvard, that looked to see if people power versus lobbyists had a say versus money power, basically. And basically there was no relationship between what the people's will was, but there was a high relationship between what corporations wanted and dictated and what lobbyists advocated for. And those ended up becoming law and policies. So that's an interesting study, and I would definitely invite everybody to basically read up on that if you haven't seen it. Somebody, Bluebell 51 said, "I'll take oligarchy for 100, Alex."
You want to wrap up because you have to get going?
Yeah, I do have to leave, and I guess Janet, you won't be here yourself.
Back to me.
That is okay. Let's read one more comment. Does anybody have one more? Okay, so Celeste Holmes again writes, "Actually, we're really living in American fascism. Amazon is working with the government on girding us with facial recognition technology." Now, the government already has facial recognition technology, and I think the government has gotten some of that from Facebook, actually, from that.
Well, there was an article out today about Amazon. Yeah, they're creating a thing for the government, for the cops, to do facial recognition for them.
I did read that, yes. But the thing is, you can have fascism and an oligarchy simultaneously, right? Just like you can have fascism and a democracy simultaneously. It's hard with a democracy, I'll grant you that, but fascism can exist in any form of political system that you have. So fascism just means that there's a certain sort of like push towards authoritarianism. And oligarchy means that there's a handful of people that are rich, or the corporations that control the laws and everything like that. Now you do have a push towards authoritarianism and fascism, particularly in centrists area. And so maybe, Janet, we should discuss that study next. I'm just fascinated by that part, and we'll discuss that further with you guys. I'm fascinated by it. But yeah, so thank you guys for watching. I really do appreciate you guys joining us and being part of the conversation. I think we're going to also try to have people call in. Maybe we may not have that set up next time, but hopefully within the next couple of weeks.
Oh, and we're going to do them on Tuesdays and Thursdays is our plan.
That is our plan. We'll be doing this Tuesdays and Thursdays. So we will see you back here, I guess, on Tuesday then. Have a great evening, y'all.
See you next Tuesday.
Yay. Bye.